Paris, the capital of fashion, the city of light, the city of love, the city of life. Hello everyone, I'm Nick, and we welcome you back to another episode of a L'Atelier du Français production, the Histories of the Jardins. Welcome back to the second episode of the season, which means it's also the final episode of the season and the final episode of the series. Time flies really fast, right? And you know they say time flies when you're having fun. Very happy to have you here. As you see, I'm in a different location as last time, and you probably have noticed last time and this time you'll see me looking down and probably sounding like I'm reading something. It's because I am breaking the fourth wall here. I'm reading my script that I read because it may be surprising, but even though a guy who researched in depth two histories of two gardens in Paris, I actually do have a life. So I was not able to memorize the script, and I hope that's okay. But just like I said, it's all accurate. You can look it up. It's proof. You can look it up. Google's your friend here. Or at least I really hope I'm right, because that'd be bad if you fact checked me and I was wrong. But I'm open to critiques, so it's okay. This episode is all about the park on the right bank. The biggest one, the most famous one. I'm sure you know it, or at least you've walked through it if you've been to the Louvre. It's the Jardin de Tuileries. Now, if you thought any of the history of the last Jardin was insane, you get to buckle in and have a blast, because anything that happened there is... You'll just see. It's much better here. It's much more bizarre. It's shocking. It is a doozy. So that's why we just gotta get right into it, starting out. The Jardin de Tuileries is not only the biggest, not only the most famous, but it's also the oldest jardin in Paris, and it started off with King Henry II, when he dies in a literal jousting match. I told you, it's bizarre, we're gonna have a good time, this history is phenomenal. After her husband's death, Queen Catherine de Medici, not the other one, moves into the Louvre. Then she decides, just kind of like how the other Medici was, but later for Luxembourg, I want a garden. I want a jardin. So, she's rich, she's able to. And with that, she buys the land next to the Louvre, naturally. And we got to have a history lesson. Can you believe it? I know, this is actually educational. Wow, look at that. So, guess what? The land itself is actually where the name the Jardin de Tuileries comes from. This land was owned, in fact, by tile factories. Henceforth, the name Tuileries, because in French, it translates. That's cool, right? I know. So, just like the other de Medici, she wants the Italian Renaissance garden, which is where the Jardin of à la Française comes from. Italian Renaissance gardens were made to be enjoyed, to take the walls down. But none of that matters when it gets destroyed in the Civil War, and then King Henry III has to run away from the Catholic League. Reoccurring motif incoming. War. Henry IV, albeit not ever living in the Louvre, basically, comes back, and with his architect, Claude Monet, not Monet, we love Monet, and it's up to you if you want to love Monet. You'll see, because he restores the gardens. He restores the gardens, he makes them better, he adds a lot of trees, especially mulberry trees, because he wanted to start a silk industry in France. From what I can tell, that didn't really go off, but he also wanted to add water with fountains in the water, which is pretty cool, especially because we are in olden times. But now, if any of that wasn't crazy enough, You get to have a really good time now because this is really where it starts to kick into gear. Skipping a few years, Louis XII dies. So who's up next, naturally? Louis XIII, who is literally 9 years old at this point, and he becomes the owner of the Jardin. So what does he do? He does just as any 9-year-old would and turns it into his natural playground, and he sets it up with places for hunting and decides to keep a zoo of exotic animals, because why wouldn't you when you're 9? That's what everybody wants. I want a panda and that. And you guys aren't going to believe it. It's history lesson time again. Look at that. When his first child was born, Louis XIV would have a circular horseback promenade. Yes, this is true, and this would become known as the carousel. So, I talk about this because not only is it funny and bizarre, like I promised, but that's why that section of the Louvre Palace and the Jardin de Tuileries, kind of the one and the same at this point, is called the carousel because Louis XIV had a literal carousel when his first son was born. Colbert, who is Louis XIV's superintendent of buildings, I can't believe that's a position, but it is, he hires a very important person. This person is Big Dog. The big dog is coming into town. This is a humongous move when it comes to designing a garden, and that is bringing in renowned French jardin designer and architect, André Lenotre. You probably don't know who this guy is, but that's okay, because I'm going to turn this into a sports analogy because I love sports, and I felt it'd be nice to show personality in this. So, we're going to go with basketball and stuff first, but do you remember when LeBron James took his talents to South Beach, Miami? This is that. This is LeBron to the Heat. Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. Shohei Ohtani to the Dodgers. And Mbappe possibly leaving PSG to go to Real Madrid. Yeah. Too soon? Well, tough. This is the man who designed Fontainebleau and would go on to design Chantilly and the greatest garden of all. Yes, this is the man who literally designed and created the Garden of Versailles. Renowned garden. So yeah, this dude's a big deal. He is God when it comes to designing jardins. God must have blessed him. He designs the garden into the foundation of what we know it as today, all the way back in 1666 through 1672. For a while now at this point, the jardin is used only for the royal family. But when they're out of town, it's opened up to nobility. One of the nobles that used it frequently was Charles Perrault. I'm American, you gotta deal with this. I'm gonna say it American, and then I'm gonna try to say it French as well. Charles Perrault, that'd be it in English, and then Charles Perrault, which maybe you don't know, but maybe you do know because he is the very author of Sleeping Beauty. He loved the Jardin so much that he wanted it to be open to the public in 1677, except for beggars, lackeys, and soldiers, of course. He would be successful in this journey and this task, and the Jardin de Tuileries would become the first royal garden to open up to the public. Now, Louis XV is 5 years old when he becomes in charge of the Jardin. In 1783, the first ever free flight of a manned hydrogen balloon, so a hot air balloon, takes off from the Jardin. Yes, the first ever hot air balloon that's manned took off in the Jardin de Tuileries. And then the revolution happens and the Jardin gets damaged. So who else but the big dog Napoleon to arrive to town. As a surprise to probably a lot of people, he actually doesn't do much to the Jardin and doesn't change it too much. But as a surprise to probably nobody, he decides to build the Arc de Triomphe du Carousel, which is still up today, and if you've seen it, is literally just a monument of him saying, yep, I'm the ruler and I've took over places. But he actually does have his wedding there at the Jardin de Tuileries. Then the July Revolution happens. So you can guess what that means. Exactly. The Jardin gets damaged as it was a battleground. Now it's Napoleon III's time to shine. Unlike his uncle, he actually makes some major changes to the Jardin. He installed the Jeu de Paume and l'Orangerie. The Jeu de Paume is just an indoor tennis court basically, and then l'Orangerie is just a place to store orange trees in the winter. And he would make the Terrasse du Bord de l'Eau into a playground for his son. Support a father, stand up. Napoleon III was a father who stepped up. The whole happy-go-lucky major changes designing wouldn't last too long though, because then Napoleon III gets captured, and then the communards deliberately try to burn down the palace, and they do. So now there's just a big empty spot, and that now becomes part of the Jardin as well. And now it is the turn of the 20th century, and Paris has two very, very big events planned. One, the World's Fair, and two, the Olympics. So, naturally, statues get added to the Jardin. And as we all know, the first half of the 20th century was very rocky and turbulent as multiple world wars break out. During World War I, known back then as the Great War, the maintenance of the Jardin went completely to the wayside, naturally, because that wasn't really the biggest concern of the French population at that time. But in the years between the world wars, the Jeu de Paume and l'Orangerie get turned into contemporary art galleries as we know them today, and they still are that today. Then in World War II, the Jardin plays a significant factor, which this is what I found genuinely really fast. All of this I found fascinating and very bizarre, but I think this is very, very fascinating, that the Jardin is very significant in the playout of World War II and the liberation of Paris, as it becomes basically a battleground for the liberation of Paris. And while the Nazis occupied it, Hitler and the Nazis would use the Jeu de Paume to store degenerate art. The art that Hitler hated, and a way to accuse Jews and Bolsheviks of being degenerate. But as we know and thankfully know, Paris was liberated and World War II turned, and the Allies were able to win. Which is just fascinating, because think just in the 300 years of the history of this one place that isn't that big. It's pretty big. It's a huge Jardin, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big. And that everybody goes to when they come to Paris was a huge part in just world history. And I find that incredibly fascinating. That would kind of be the last of it for the major changes of the Jardin de Tuileries. And the Jardin now, just as Luxembourg when we ended their history, just as everything does, minor changes as life goes on. And yeah, that's a lot. And hopefully you found it just as shocking as I did when I was reading and researching. But that, my friends, is the history of the Jardin de Tuileries. And it's only right for me to go through the other jardins and parks that I adore in the right bank of Paris, just as I did with the left bank for Luxembourg. First, the Jardin du Palais Royal. It's only a 10-minute walk from the Tuileries, so theoretically you could visit these parks in the same hour if you really, really wanted to. But it's great for a quick stroll through, or to read, or with the special chairs that they have an intelligent conversation or a completely idiotic conversation with a friend. My next favorite, one that is amazing because you can actually sit in the grass, Parc Monceau, or Parc Monceau. I'm American. I'm trying to learn French. I have a little bit, but when it comes to parks, it's nameless. It's just a great time, so excuse me. But this is located in the 8th arrondissement, and it is genuinely just an amazing place to sit in grass if the sun is out, soak in the sun, read, and just chill out. And obviously just as sitting in the grass lends itself to having a picnic. And those are two other parks that I frequent often and that I genuinely do love. And I hope that if you ever come to Paris, or if you've been to Paris, that you find the same beauty in them as I do. Yeah. And I hope you enjoyed sharing this experience of 2 episodes of the 2 grand histories of Jardins. And for the second and final time, man, this could make a grown man cry. We got it. If it is morning, have a great day. If it's the afternoon, have a great rest of your day. And if it's night, have a good night. I'll see you soon.